What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Coffee Hour with Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, as if you don't know who I am already by now. And if you're new to the show, thanks for joining me. We do Coffee Hour Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, and we go about an hour. Sometimes we stop a little earlier, but y'all know me, I'm long-winded, so I tend to go longer than an hour. So if you are new, on the show, we kind of talk about all things electrical, all different topics in electrical. And again, it's really driven by what you folks want to talk about for your coffee drive, going into work or getting prepared for your day. And again, we just had New Year's, so I do want to say to everybody, congratulations to making it to 2025. Let's make it a really prosperous year. Hopefully everybody's family's safe, and if anybody's going through hard times, I just think that our thoughts and prayers are with you. Generically through any of your issues that you're running through. Obviously, it can be a tough time of year for many people. And so everybody is going through all different types of things in their life, but hopefully 2025 for us contractors and people that are in the electrical industry, it will be a good year for everybody. Okay, if you haven't joined me before, one of the things I like to do is, hey, if you're new or you've never been here before or you're just stopping in, whatever it may be, do me a favor, say hi, tell me your name, tell me where you're from, tell me whether you're a fast track student or not, whether you've been in our programs, all those type of things. Remember, this show is for you. So how do you do a topic like today's topic? Today's topic actually came from somebody asking if I would talk a little bit more about transformer primary protection and explain in a little more detail, because sometimes I go very quickly, a little more detail of primary protection, that is the 125 or the 250%, and the sizing of those conductors on the primary side. And then they said, Paul, can you break it down so that maybe later you can talk about all the secondary conductor rules and all those type of things in 240.21c. But Paul, will you condense it down and focus on primary so that I can walk away from the show and not feel like I'm overwhelmed? Absolutely, I can, and that's what I'm here for. So real quick, let's shout out to some folks that are joining us today, because we love to shout out. Richard, good morning. Anaheim, wow, y'all are early in California. Appreciate you for joining me. Who we got here? We've got Jason. Thank you, Jason. Louisiana, Jason, sorry about what happened. Condolences to all of you Louisians who went through that issue. It's horrific thought that people on a New Year's celebration have to worry about some crazed lunatic driving a vehicle into a crowd and harming people. I can't fathom where we're at in this world. There is evil everywhere. But you, Jason, be the shining light in Louisiana, and our thoughts and prayers are with all the people that suffered through that incident. Let's see. Oscar, good morning. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me. Glad you could be with us. Here's a familiar face. Terrence Grace. Terrence Grace, thank you for joining from the DMV. Olo, you got your day started out. Interesting. I always heard problems about the DMV near where we moved here back to Virginia, and I went to DMV and got everything done in one swoop. They did everything, car registration, everything. I was shocked that I had a pleasant experience, because usually I don't have a pleasant experience at DMV. Also, if you got your coffee, this is one of our new mugs. This is the Licensed Tradesman series. This is the Master. We have a Journeyman, and they're available in white and black. Let's see here. What do we got here? There's my Simplex man. What's up? Thanks for joining me. I believe Alabama. Charlie, what's up, Charlie? Good morning from Long Island, New York. There you go. You're on the East Coast, so you're good to go. Richard G says, fast track student. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate your support, and we're excited about new things to bring you in 2025. Let's see. We got Alex is in the house, Wisconsin. Thank you, Alex, for taking the time out of your day to join me. TJI, knew you'd be here. Good morning. Thanks for joining me. Titan says, I went through the Fast Tracks Black a couple years ago, passed the Alabama test the first time. Whoop, whoop. Hold on here. I don't know why my whole table shakes when I do that, but as always, and you were amazing in the program. When we used to do the lives on Wednesday nights, it was awesome. Oh, TJI. Okay, you and Titan are state buddies. He's also from Alabama. I believe it's Alabama. Maybe I'm sorry, I might be wrong there again. I don't know what I said, Titan, but I think it's Alabama. Let's see, Dominic, Texas, out where I am. Spent the last 10 years, and back here in Virginia. But good morning out in Texas. Jose, again, another one from Texas. Thank you, Jose. Thanks for joining me out in Texas. It's probably a little 7 a.m., 7:05 a.m. out there. We got Alonzo. Good morning from Wisconsin, and that is awesome. What do we got here? Jason, thank you. And of course, we have Red Dog, Los Angeles, rise and shine early out there. No rest for the eager and no rest for the people that are engaging and trying to get their daily hustle going on. I've been doing that for damn near 39 years, coming on 39 years. So what do we got here? We got Orion, is that how I say it? Good morning from New York. All right. Let's see here with Terrence. Terrence is I remember Terrence is a contractor working up there in DC, Maryland, Virginia. Oh, DMV. Ugh. Let's see here again. And TDI giving some shout outs to Titan, I believe. Both are Alabama boys. It is. Okay. All right. Roll Tide. All right. All right. So today what we're going to do is, and I'm not sure how I cut that one off. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Today we're going to be talking transformer primary, and we're going to focus very specific on the primary only, not the secondary. We're not going to talk about those rules because I plan on doing that for another coffee hour. So make sure you catch it. And before I get started in the lesson, because it will go pretty quick today, I do want to say that I don't know if you folks caught yesterday's special coffee hour where I talked about what's coming for Fast Tracks Tube. I'm not going to go into that. Hopefully you caught it. And we got some more shout outs here. Alexander, good morning from Central Florida. And we got Anthony. Anthony, good morning as well. So thank y'all for all joining me this morning. Okay, so Fast Tracks Tube is going to be changing a little bit. I think it's for the good. What it's going to be doing is we're going to be, not all of it, but we're going to be introduced. People have asked, Paul, will you do training videos? And I do a lot of videos, and they don't really sync with our course. They're just random videos. And we're going to continue to do videos, but we have been asked, and we got together and hired our team, and we're going to be doing some videos using our new interactive feature, which is going to be able to give you a lesson and then ask you questions about the lesson, and it's going to rank you with other people on those videos, so you can see how well you do, all those type of things. And it's just a good interactive thing to help community, and it's really going to make Fast Tracks Tube a place to go for education. The other beautiful thing is our software allows us to be able to do this with any video, not just ours. And we don't have to be beholden to YouTubes or TikToks or anybody else so that we control the outcome so that we can't be, quote, canceled. Now, you can just stop watching, but we won't be canceled, okay? That type of thing. So it's always been my goal is to be kind of like you should be, self-sufficient. I don't have to worry about anybody else, you know what I'm saying? That's always been my goal. And as a contractor, that was always my goal too. Make sure that I had my supplies, I had what I needed, everything was stocked, that I didn't have to be beholden to somebody else that could hold me hostage for price, that type of thing. Anyway, enough of that. So anyway, that got that going on. And then lastly, we still have our coins and all of our engraved products. This is the Journeyman coin. We have the inspector coins and all that kind of stuff. That is available over on our store over on fasttracksystem.com. All right, so we're going to talk transformers today. All right, so primary protection. Okay, for those that aren't, I'll set the stage. So what we're talking about is a typical transformer. Let's say we're going to stick with the 75 kVA transformer for simplicity's sake. And it's going to be a 480 primary, and we're only working on the primary. But I'll make some comments that are educational for you that maybe will help check some of those boxes. You know, if you want a plans examiner coin, Anthony, we can most certainly create a plans examiner coin. Send me something, paulabernathy.com, about some thoughts and ideas that you think would be cool on a coin, and we'll see if we can't come up with something like that. All right, so we create all of our designs in-house, so easily doable. Okay, I don't know how mass marketing it will be because I don't sell a whole lot of coins, but hey, if you want a coin, we can create something. When we think about transformers, we're going to keep it simple. 75 kVA. We're talking primary, 480 volt primary. Remember, whatever you're dealing with, again, you could have a PV system where you're dealing with grid connected, where you might have a lower voltage on the primary and a higher voltage on the secondary because you're maybe doing something like a PV grid system. The rules are still the same. Okay. If we're going to try to take a transformer, we're going to find out what the current is, okay, or the amps, okay, on the transformer primary, and that's what we're focusing on today's episode. We simply take the transformer's kVA, which is 75 kVA, so it's 75,000 VA, and since it is three-phase, we're going to divide it by the voltage times the square root of 3, 1.732. Okay, and that's typically going to give us a value 831.36, I believe, but we'll work it out and see that's what we get. So that's how we want to find the primary side current for that transformer. Okay, pretty simple. So if I did the math and I did 75,000, well, first let's get our multiplier. So if it's 480 primary, 480 times 1.732, because it is three-phase. So that ends up being 831.36. Now, I'm going to tell you, in an exam, 831, you're going to be close enough. In the real world, I mean, it doesn't hurt. Just use the full value, right? So if I use the full value, then I just, again, go 480 times 1.732 equals, and so I'm just going to write 831.36. I'm just going to use the whole value. I mean, why not, right? Why not? This isn't exam prep. This is just talking code. Okay, so in order to find the amps on the primary side, then what we're going to do is take the 75,000 and divide it into the 831.36. So I'm going to do that real quick so we can get our amps so we can work with it a little bit today. So 75,000, which is your VA for your transformer. We said we'll be working with the 75 kVA transformer. Divided by 831.36, and that gives me 90.21. Okay, for all intents and purposes, for sizing our overcurrent in today's lesson, as far as sizing our conductors and all that kind of good stuff, we're pretty much going to work with the 90.21, okay? So we really could just use the 90 for that application and be done with it, okay? Now, let me tell you a couple things that you have to take into consideration in the real world. On an exam, it's pretty simple. We're going to go to 450.3b. We're going to choose, if it says maximum overcurrent protection to protect the transformer, we're going to use 250%. That's the maximum. You don't have to in the real world, but that is the maximum. And the real simple rule is whatever that is, the conductors have to be sized equal to or greater than the overcurrent device that it's connecting into. So that's the easy exam method. So it's pretty straightforward. Well, of course, we'll look at an example, but that's pretty straightforward, right? Some of the golden rules to remember is that whatever the overcurrent protection is that you choose, and we're talking with a 1,000 volts or less transformer, let's get that out of the way. And we know that we're generating 9 amps or more, okay? So if that's the scenario and we're using primary and secondary protection, okay, that means that your secondary conductors are terminating in an overcurrent device, maybe in a panel board, or in a enclosure with a panel board in it with a main breaker, let's say. The primary side is what we're focusing on. So we know that it's 90 amps or 90.21 amps primary current. Okay, that transformer is current limiting, folks. So it's not like you can get 10 pounds of crap out of a 5-pound bag. It's it. Okay, you're going to get 90 amps out of it. Anything more than that, you're going to be overloading the transformer, shortening its life, and the odds of you getting anything usable out of that beyond what the current limitation is on that transformer as slim and none. Okay, slim and none. Right now, there are some people that say, well, if that's the case, Paul, then why do I have to size the conductors on the primary side equal to or greater than the overcurrent protection that's sized to protect the transformer? Well, not just because of short circuit current applications, because the breaker should be fine. The other reason for that is, again, you could have overloading of that transformer for a certain period of time. And the other requirement is that in 240.4, it requires us to protect those conductors at their ampacity. So so in our case, if I was only doing let's say it was required to be a 4-aught, let's just say, for primary, and I'll show you all this in a minute. So I'm just giving you summaries real quick. If I did primary protection and it was up to 250%, but my conductors, it needed to be, let's say, I'm just throwing numbers out there, a 4-aught or 3-aught, and it ended up being a 2 gauge because I'm just trying to size a conductor for the 90 amps, let's say, then what happens is basically the rules, even though the transformer is current limiting, it should be fine. You still got the rules in the code in 240.4 that says you have to protect the conductors at their ampacity. So if that conductor is rated for 90 amps, there's no way that it's being protected by that 225 amp overcurrent protected device. Now, we do this for motors. We do this for HVAC systems and all that. But the reality is we really don't get the exceptions, the allowances that we get in 240.4D, for example, for small conductor rule. We don't get the same allowances for those transformers. Transformers aren't listed in there for that application. So we have to protect those conductors at what? Their ampacity. So that means if it was a 90 amp rated conductor and it's terminated into a 225 amp overcurrent protected device that's protecting the transformer's primary, right? It still would not be protecting what? It wouldn't be protecting those conductors on the primary side. So we'd have to jump it up to a conductor that is going to be actually protected, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's scenarios. Now, with that said, you still have the allowance to use rules like the next size up rule, as long as you fall within the scope of 240.4b, then you can fall within that scope. They'll still be considered protected. But we'll look at all that. I just want to give you the synopsis of it before we get too far into today's lesson. Michael, good morning. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate you being here. And there you go. Round Rock, Texas, right down the road from me when I was working at Samsung. There you go. And this ATM, thanks for joining me. North Carolina, good collection of group of folks today from a little bit of everywhere today. Okay, so let's go on and look over at some of the information from our Fast Tracks program. By the way, if you're in our program, a lot of this is going to be in Unit 14, and some of it's going to be in Unit 17 as well. Okay. Oops. All right, so let's get the coffee out of the way. Let's get a sip before we get started. Maybe you got your morning coffee. Sounds like many of you are already on site working. So, okay. All right, breaking in the new year. Right. Okay, so let's see here. So transformer protection. So if we had primary only protection, and again, we're looking at the application for where we would have using table 450.3b, and we're doing only primary protection. So in that table, and I'll show you the table, but we have the options for primary only protection, which means we would have no secondary protection. And under that, you have to meet very specific rules, right? And then, of course, you have where you have primary and secondary protection. And that's typically what we would run into. And in that scenario, you have the primary protection could go up to 250%. And then your secondary protection would be up to 125%. All right. So let me make sure I give you an example. Okay, so here we go. So I wanted to show the illustration. It's easy for me to show an illustration, and it's kind of trying to get you both in here best I can get it. Okay. So if we have primary only protection and we can meet all those rules, then we can go up to 125% on the primary, and it would not be required to have any protection on the secondary. As with our program, you see C is this call out. It says no secondary overcurrent protection is required for certain transformers at 1,000 volts nominal or less, with currents at least 9 amps and a maximum primary overcurrent protection of 125%. Okay. All right. Now, important note here, it says the absence of secondary protection applies only to certain type of applications in the panel boards and exceptions. Okay. So typically what you're going to have is anytime you have a panel board, right? So for the most part, when you have a transformer and you're feeding a panel on the secondary side, although we weren't going to talk secondary, but if you do, then you're required by 408.36 to provide protection for that panel board. And so that's going to pretty much dictate a lot of your secondary conductor sizing. Obviously, they have to handle the load, but at the end of the day, one question I get from people, and I only want to touch on this, is in this same transformer that we're talking about, the one we've been discussing, a 75 kVA, if the secondary is not required to have any protection, right, then you have to make sure that it is everything is going to be protected from the primary. Now, one of the things you have to be aware of is that we have secondary conductor rules. And so secondary conductor rules with those secondary conductors have a rule on the length, 10 foot, 25 foot rule, outside feeder tap, outside conductor rules. All those type of things are coming into play, okay? And so that's why we want to make sure that we do the secondary conductors on a totally separate show so that I can break down the 10 foot and the 25 foot and all that kind of stuff. So we very much want to focus everything today on the primary side protection. Okay, so with that said, I just want to, let's see here. I just want to show you how we would calculate our example on the primary side. That's the whole focus of today, is to talk about the primary. So let's get us back to this lesson really quick. Okay, so let's look at this one. These are based on our figures, based on what we discussed. This would be this transformer, okay? If we were doing this one and happened to apply to this rule where we have primary only protection and no secondary protection, okay? Then what we want to do is the primary protection up to 125%. So this transformer, let's just say this was we said this was 90.21 amp transformer. Okay, that would be the amps on the primary side. We already did that math. If you're coming in late, we did that 75,000 divided by 831.36, because the 831.36 is the square root, is where you take the 480 times the square root of 3. That's how we get it, okay? In the real world, if you just want to drop it to 831, you're going to be fine. It's going to get you close enough, okay? All right, so in this case, if it was 90.21, the maximum, and we'll look at the notes, but the maximum here, primary protection, or the primary protection at 125% would be, and let's do the math. So that would be 90.21. Again, you can drop the 0.21 if you wish, all right, times 1.25. And that's going to be 112.76, okay? So it'll be 112.76. So in our case here, we want to talk about, let's talk about the primary. And so that would be our primary protection. So now what we look at is go, okay, if that is a primary protection, let's go to the NEC and see if I can't pop this thing out and if it shows it. Okay, good enough. So primary only protection, if that's what we're working with, you notice it says 125%, right? Hold on here. Yeah, make sure I can see it. I can't really blow it up any bigger than this or make it move it. So we'll just move the slide bar. All right, so that's your primary. So notice this little one right here. So this little one says, you know what? Ours was 112.76. Okay, well, this is a maximum. So it typically you can't exceed the 125%. So in our case, if it's 112.76, we're like, well, I can't go up because that's a maximum rule. But we have that little one right here. And a lot of people forget about the little notes. And I had somebody that emailed me the other day that was talking about motors, a synchronous motor. And they didn't realize that when you're looking at the motor tables, that there was a column all the way to the right, for example, 3-phase, that only dealt with synchronized motors. And so they weren't looking at that. And I was like, gotta read the questions really careful in order to, and the notes are very important because under that table, there was a little note. Here we have a little note. And here, notice it says, where 125% of the current does not correspond to the standard rating of a fuse or non-adjustable circuit breaker, so a standard molded case circuit breaker, it says a higher rating that does not exceed the next higher standard rating shall be permitted. So in our case, it was 112.75, right? Okay, well, I can promise you that there isn't a breaker that's rated 112.75. So in our scenario is we're able to go to 240.6 and see what standard is available. And that's what this table is all about down here, guys. This is a standard rating, okay? These are standard sizes. Can you find overcurrent devices in non-standard sizes? Absolutely, you can. They are available out there, right? But this is what the rule said, next standard size. So if I go down here to the list and I see I got a 110, okay, then it goes to 125. So I don't have any 112. So can I use a 125 amp overcurrent device, whether it's fuse or circuit breaker? Absolutely I can. So we're going to have 125 amp primary protection. So let's take you back to here. So this primary protection, okay, is going to be 125 amps, okay? Now, stick with me too if you're here and you're like, I know this stuff, because we're also going to talk about the conductor sizing, for example, if this happens to be a tap off of a feeder that's supplying a transformer, which is very common, okay, in a lot of commercial and industrial applications. So this is just easy because this is fed straight from a panel, coming straight to the primary, and then going down to the transformer. This one's straightforward. All right, so these conductor sizes. So now I have to have a conductor, okay, even though we know that the primary side is 90.21, okay? And what we did was we took it at 125%. That was the table. So typically, we're going to size the conductors that are going to be equal to or greater than whatever the overcurrent protected device is for the primary, right? Now, one of the questions I get from folks that says, Paul, do I treat these conductors in all cases at 125%? Right. Well, the good answer to that is from an engineering design standpoint, the answer would be yes, I'm going to treat those at 125%. Even if you see later where I can go up to 250% on a primary. The thing is, this takes care of itself, so you don't have to overthink it, okay? Now, one of the things I do want to bring up for folks, just as a topic of discussion, and let this bounce around in your head, is that sometimes you have to remember that these conductors right here are going to be exposed to loads on the secondary that are continuous loads. So you'll have continuous loads, and then you'll have non-continuous loads. So in order to make sure that you're sizing these conductors properly, now if you size everything in the transformer to 125, then you're not going to go wrong, okay? And if you're in the real world, that's probably what you're going to do because again, we still can't be less than the primary protection, right? So you'll be okay. But I always tell engineers, any engineers that are listening out there that are designing systems, to remember that in many cases, you could have loads on that secondary that are going to transfer over to the primary side, and you might have continuous loads, and then you might have non-continuous loads. And we have to remember that we take all continuous loads at 125% and non-continuous loads at 100%. Okay, so that might transfer over. And in a future episode, I'm going to show you how to break those things down so that you can account for it. But don't have to worry about it as an electrician. Typically, most engineers on the primary side are going to size their conductors to be equal to or greater than what you would see in the primary protection. Now, remember, this is up to 125%. Do I have to go to 125%? Absolutely not. That table was maximum. Could I be less? Yes. But what do you run the risk of? You run the risk of inrush. Whatever load you have on that secondary and pushing through that transformer, you run the risk of the transformer popping off the overcurrent protection. And That's not a nuisance trip. That's a poor design. So be careful. And I always tell people, again, this is not always, these coffee hours are not designed just for exam prep. So I say in the real world, remember that if you're going to have primary only protection, which most time you're not, we're going to have the 251 that we do. And I'll show you what engineers would do with that. But just remember, the maximum's there for a reason. Make sure that everything aligns. So my advice to you is primary is 125%. If that's what you do, if primary only protection, then those conductors will be also equal to or greater than whatever the primary protection is. Keep life simple, okay? Now, the only time that I worry about any of that somebody would even mention that, is if I'm less than 125%, then it really doesn't matter, right? Because you're still going to be sizing your conductors to whatever the overcurrent protection is, so they're always going to be protected. Downside is, still could cause the breaker to pop. So that's why you want to make sure that you're doing everything right. Okay, so the next one we want to look at is primary and secondary protection really quickly, and then we'll get into the feeder tap applications that you might run into in the real world. Okay, so here we are, and we're just kind of, and this is still in Unit 14, by the way. All right, this is a case where we're looking at this scenario. So people ask me all the time, so when is there a scenario when I would go up to 250% on the primary side? Well, I might go up to 250% on the primary side if I'm having trouble with the transformer, if I'm having an issue where I might be supplying multiple secondary loads, multiple panels, and that type of thing that could put a lot of stress onto the transformer, assuming you sized the transformer properly, and all those type of things. So there is a possibility, and the code allows me to go up if I've got primary and secondary protection. And so example of that is in this panel here. If these secondary conductors are terminating into an overcurrent protected device, let's say under the 10-foot rule, then they're not only protecting this panel board, but we also know that we're not allowed to use the next size up rule for these secondary conductors. So they will be sized equal to or greater than the overcurrent device that they terminate into. Okay. So in this scenario right here, everything is okay. Everything will be protected in that scenario. So, but you could have a transformer feed actual multiple loads. You want to keep that in mind. Let me catch up real quick. Good morning, Joe. Thanks for joining me. Dog boy, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Joe is on the way to the office with his dunks. I'm assuming you mean Dunkin' Donuts. All right. Cool. All right, so let's talk protection real quick here. All right, so if I look at the National Electrical Code, okay, and we'll go there real quick. Let's look at transformer protection. This is probably what you could deal with most time, because in a majority of the situations that I see, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, wherever it is, majority of the people are taking a transformer and they're hitting a panel that's right next to it, or usually within 10 feet or in close proximity. Okay, now, we're not going to be sizing secondary conductors and all that kind of stuff. We're going to do that for another video that gets you hyped up. And I do have videos on this over on Fast Tracks Tube. If you want to go watch them and get ahead of the curve, you can do that. That's perfectly fine. But remember, today's episode, we're trying to stick with the primary protection. So let's get down here, right here. And I'm going to pop this back out real quick. And of course, if you have any questions in the comments, feel free to post them away. I'll try to answer them if I can. All right, so here's our primary. Now notice it says maximum rating again, okay? And we're going to be looking at primary and secondary protection. So this is typically where you're going to have protection for the primary of the transformer, and we have to protect the primary. And we have secondary protection. Now, here's an important distinction that I think I want to get out of the way because people get confused on this. These are two different rules. Okay, the 450s are talking about the transformer. We're talking about protecting the transformer. Could it be that that transformer protection also is going to protect the conductors? Absolutely. But where are the conductor rules? Well, the conductor rules are in 240. Okay, 240.4, their protection. So we still have to meet them. There's nothing here that can circumvent. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there's a lot of engineer designers out there, and God bless them, who say, you know what, that transformer is current limiting. So if the transformer is a 90.21 amps, okay, and that is the current that it can have on the primary side, that is a limiting factor. So a lot of them will say, well, I just need to size the conductors based on that 90.21 amps. And someone will say that, and they say even if the overcurrent's higher, it will protect it, because that's the same thing we do with motors. That's the same thing we do with HVAC applications. But there is no provision in there for that. It doesn't say that anywhere in the code. That's an engineering design. So as an engineer wants to design it that way, absolutely, that's fine. Because the reality is that's an engineer deal. It's not the NEC. So the reality is if I size my conductors to the 90 and the current limiting of the transformer lets it not exceed that, then only in a short circuit condition do we worry about the overcurrent protecting the transformer. Then I can understand their design concept of that, because a transformer is current limiting. And only so much. That's the old, again, 5 pounds of crap or 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag scenario. But that is not necessarily for us what the code says, because 240.4 is very clear. It says we have to protect conductors at their ampacity. And we're not protecting a 90 amp rated conductor by terminating it onto a 225 amp overcurrent protected device if we're using the 250% allowance, the maximum allowance. So this is where you run into conflicts with inspectors. If you're following the engineer design and you're the poor electrician that may be caught in the middle. Okay, so that's a discussion where you say, look, I'm just doing what's on the drawings, and you need to talk to the engineer. And then the owner will get ticked off of the building, and they'll say, look, I'm following what the engineer says. I get it. I have to get an inspection, but you need to have a conversation with the engineer, because I'm doing what the engineer says. And the moment that I don't follow what the engineer says, then all of a sudden I'm the bad guy as the contractor, right? And so again, we're stuck in that rock and a hard place scenario. But if you were doing it as an as-build and you're sizing all this stuff, then you're definitely going to do that. Remember, we're also sizing a transformer based on our anticipated load or future capacity, if that's what we want. In other words, let's just take our example of our transformer again. 75 kVA transformer, 480 volt primary, 208, 120 secondary, right? And I'm only going to go into the secondary to illustrate a point. If I'm thinking about sizing the secondary in my panel board for my loads, whatever loads I'm going to have in this building, I have to make sure that my panel board, one is the transformer, one can handle the loads, right? So at a 75 kVA transformer, I want to know what is the maximum secondary current that I can have. Just going to go with me here. So in that case, in order to find the multiplier for the secondary, since it's 208 volts line to line, I'm going to do 208, and it's 3-phase. I'm going to do that times 1.732, just like we did before. And that is the old familiar 360.256. Familiar with that? And we typically in the field, we just use 360, okay? So in order to find out what the actual current is for that secondary, because we already did the primary, then that would be 75,000 again, because that's the one thing that doesn't change. The wattage remains the same, okay? Primary to secondary, the wattage doesn't change. So 75,000 divided by 360.256, that's going to give me 208.18, or we could say 208.2, or in the real world, we could just say 208 volts. 208 amps, okay? All right, so at 208 amps, okay, just go with me here. At 208 amps, I could go, and let's go to the code real quick. Let me show you. At 208 amps, it says, okay, here is a secondary protection, and it definitely are 9 amps or more. We're still at 450.3 B, by the way. It says 125%. Right? So if I had 208 amps, 208.2, let's say, or just 208.18, use the pure amount if you want. Doesn't matter in the field. Use 208. But I'm going to use the exact amount we had, 208.18, just for craps and giggle purposes. I'm going to go 208.18 times 1.25, and that is 260.225. Okay, You're now sizing the overcurrent protection for the secondary. Okay, I said I wasn't going to do it, but I got to do this to illustrate a point to you folks. This is a maximum, but you notice it also still has this little 1. The little 1 is the same rule. If it doesn't correspond to 125% standard rating, that I can go to the next standard size, right? Okay, well, I can promise you there isn't a 260.225 amp rated overcurrent protected device, okay? Now this, again, this 1 allows me to go up. Now this is a standard situation where you have a transformer it's feeding a panel in your commercial environment. Everyday situation, okay? So I've got to have that protection so those conductors terminate into the overcurrent device that's in that panel, okay? And let's say, I'm trying to give you an everyday example. And so I can take that too. So now I need to see what is the overcurrent device that I can use here. I'm doing this to illustrate a point. Hang with me. So let's go to 240.6, and all my haters out there say, Paul, you drag things out. Well, you know what? There's other shows to watch. I appreciated the limited time you spent with me today. You may take your ass on somewhere else if that's your feeling. It's okay, but everybody that knows me gets me. All right, so we're over here, and let's see here. We have a 225. We have a 250, but we don't have a 260. So that next size rule says I could do what? It says I could go up. So I'm going to have a 300 amps, okay? 300 amps. That gives me the allowance. So if I come back to our illustration, then remember this primary side here was 225, and this secondary can be up to 300 amps. Now here's what you may be thinking. Wait a minute, Paul. That transformer, the maximum amount that it can put out is 208.18 amps. You know, remember that current limiting? You know, 5 pounds of crap, 10 pounds of crap, 5-pound bag scenario. Yeah. There's nothing in the NEC that says that I can't size this thing and put this into an overcurrent device that's 300 amps. The only thing that's going to dictate this is what are my loads? And am I going to cause this transformer to overheat, bog down, potentially shorten its life, overheat it, melt the resin separators? Am I going to do that? Yes. If so, I have to do a calc. I have to know what my loads are, right, in this scenario. Okay. And I also know that if this was 300 amps, because I can, okay, that's a maximum, then I could actually, these conductors would be sized equal to or greater, because we cannot use the next size up rule, because that tells us in 240.21c for secondary conductors that we cannot use 240.4b, the next size up. So they'd have to be full sized right here. Okay. You with me? So we'll assume that we sized everything. We assume we sized this transformer amps that we needed for this transformer based on if we had any continuous loads out here that are being supplied at 125%, any non-continuous loads at 100%. Assuming we did all that, we sized our transformer because we know what we need from a transformer. Then we say, well, we're going to just make this thing a 300, even though we know that this transformer can't put out but 208 amps. There's no code violation to that. Just remember that these conductors have to be sized. Even though we know that this is a limiting factor, it has to be sized based on what? The rating of the device that it terminates into. That was under the 10-foot rules for secondary conductors. Now, again, we weren't going to go into secondaries, but the reason I bring this up is this is maximum. In the field, no logically minded engineer is going to do this at the maximum. They're not going to do it at 300. Okay. What they're going to do is that transformer is limited, so they're probably going to supply a 200 amp panel in this thing. Maybe rare occasions they're going to go to a 225 because they can. They can. The load that's calculated, again, the transformer is current limiting anyway. That type of scenario. The problem with with you going higher is that you do run the risk of overloading this transformer. You do run the risk of the heat buildup, and it prematures the life of the transformer. But there's absolutely nothing in the NEC that says you can't. And as long as those secondary conductors are sized properly, and as long as they terminate in you follow the let's say the secondary conductor rules, you can do it. So remember, that's a maximum rules. You don't have to be the maximum. So most engineers will say in this scenario, on this transformer, they'll say, okay, I'm going to go, and very rarely do they ever use a 250% on the primary. Usually what the engineer will do is they'll do 125% primary, which also takes into account any loads that may be continuous that they're not aware of, and for these conductor sizing. So they'll do the primary at 125%. They don't go all the way up to 250. They do it at 125%, and they size the conductors at 125%. Then they go to the secondary, and they do the same thing, but they size their panels and loads indicative of what the transformer can actually handle. And so if it is a 208 amp secondary, it means 208 amps are being pulled out of it. And let me make sure excuse me, 200, let's see, hold on real quick. 75,000 divided by, let's see here, 360. Just give me a rough number. Yeah, so if it's 208 amps, they might go to a 225. And then the conductors will be rated 225. But the most I know on a 75 will probably supply a 200 amp, okay? That type of thing. So just keep that in mind when you're doing transformers, that those are maximum numbers. You don't have to go to maximum, okay? All right, Red Dog, thanks for joining me. Appreciate you being here, taking your time to join us in your trip to work. Building an hour frame ladder rack on a utility trailer. Is that what you're at today? That's like, you do a lot of that lighting. Tyson does a lot of lighting outdoor, like stadium lighting and things like that, I believe, if I'm right. Okay, can't remember. All right. So anyway, does that all make sense? So easy to size the primary side. Now, let's talk a little bit about feeders. Now, I'm going to show you something really quick. Let's see if I can find it real quick. My bookmark. Okay, so what about taps that are supplying a transformer? So this is another one, because the conductor sizing we just did is pretty straightforward if you realize those type of things. And we'll get deeper in future episodes where I break down how the continuous and non-continuous loads on the secondary impact the primary and how you would break those things down. But again, if you follow the conductor rules, as we just said, you're typically not going to have any problem at all anyway. But I do want to show you, so that was the easy, straightforward. And what happens now, and let me show you an example. Here's an example, if I can get it centered here. So here's an example where you have a feeder coming out, right? And it's coming down into this trough, and it's feeding these two panels here, or whatever, these little disconnects that are going on to whatever they're going on to. And here you have the connection for this transformer right here. And it's connecting directly onto the feeder. So this is a feeder tap scenario that is supplying a transformer, okay? It is permitted for this to take place, okay? Now, you have to remember there are rules, and again, in our reference in our book, we do give you references back to 14. That's just where we are, where we were for all the transformer provisions. But right now, we're talking about what happens for this being able to tap a feeder. How does this change the conductor size? Okay, all right. Well, this is what we're looking at right here, okay, is all these rules in 240.21 B3, okay, B3. So let's go look at that in the code real quick. Let's see here, 240.21. All right, so you may run into this scenario. You may be asked to run, and you're running a feeder, and you're running it out to other loads, and they size it adequate, and they did the load calculations, but now they're saying, hey, what you want you to do is I need you to tap off of that feeder tap. It's adequately sized. You hope that that's been done, and now it's going to feed a transformer. What are the rules? Okay, well, let's go down, and what we're going to look at is here, okay? Taps supplying transformers. Oh, I got to share the page, that way you can see it. So we're at, for those that are following along in your code book, we're at 240.21. And we're down, and we're still at feeder taps. We're at B. We're not at C. That's secondary conductors. They are not taps. Those are secondary conductor rules. We're at taps. All right, so here we have taps for supplying a transformer. That is the primary plus the secondary, not over 25 feet long. Okay, so if I showed you the example, and let's go here. Hold on here. Let's see. Oh. No, I got to take you back to my example. Let me show you my example right here. So this is what we're talking about right here. See? So this right here, so people aren't confused, this is a panel. This is feeding multiple loads. Okay? And I can blow this up a little bit if it's hard to see. That a little better? This right here, this panel is, this here is feeding this trough, which is feeding multiple loads. So it's a feeder. And they're tapping onto it here to feed this transformer. This is a feeder tap. All right. Now, that rule, we said you have a maximum of 25 feet combined. So the length of this tap right here, plus the length of the secondary, combined cannot be more than what? 25 feet. Now, why do we do that? That's because typically in doing this, it would be the transformer is in close proximity to the panel that it supplies. Right? Right. And so there's the caveats to do this. And again, in my day, we did quite a few where we ran transformers. I mean, we ran circuits, and we not only supplied loads, but we also knew that we were going to be tapping that feeder in order to be able to supply a transformer. And of course, where we tapped it, we didn't go very far before we hit the transformer. Usually was all in the same room, but we hit the transformer and then we checked out. Now, why would you do this? A lot of times this can be done because maybe this is in a utility room or somewhere where we need to change voltages for another type of load. Maybe it's the lighting. So maybe this is all 480 stuff here, and we need to get some 12208 loads. So boom, they put in a transformer, tap it here, bring the 480 in, and then boom, we can get a panel that's going to do maybe the lighting and that type of thing all in the same room. So this is a scenario where you may have this transformer. Okay? This is also a good example of where you might have multiple voltages in the building now, and now you have to label as such when you have different voltage systems in a building. We talked about that in a previous coffee hour. Okay. All right. So we got to meet some rules here. So let's go back to the rules. What are the rules? All right. So the rules for this one are right here. It says where the tap conductor supplying the transformer, and that is where it tapped it in that wireway down to the transformer. It says where the tap conductors supply the transformer and comply with the following conditions. Okay. Now, all of these conditions, not some of them, not part of them, all of these conditions. It says, number one, the conductor supplying the primary of the transformer, they have to have an ampacity at least 1/3 the rating of the overcurrent protecting device for the feeder. Okay, well, let's take you back here. So since this in here, and this probably will take care of itself, but that's the first rule we have to meet. So if we want to do this little tap dealy here, this is 300 amps. So first thing, we have to make sure that it can't be less. So this feeder tap right here, first of all, it cannot be less than 100 amps because that would be 1/3 of 300, right? So we already have our first factor that we have to consider. So no matter what we do, we know that this right here can't be less than 100 amps. And of course, if we look at our call outs, right, then we get that example right here, B, which is B right here. For those, again, those are in the fast tracks, are familiar with this. So B, it says a 100 amp rated conductor is the minimum size allowed if the overcurrent protection on the tap conductor side is 300 amps. Again, remember, it said 1/3. And that's what this rule right here. Now, these are the important things about our chevrons in our program is stop, go, and read it. If you're in our program and you're not stopping and going and reading that, you're not using the program to your best benefit. Okay, just saying that right now. You'll get something out of it, but you're not going to get the most out of it. We're wanting to work you in and out of the code book. Okay, all right. Let me get rid of that highlight real quick because I don't want that there. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. So let's get back to here. All right, so check. Got that taken care of. Next, it says the conductors supplied by the secondary of the transformer, okay, shall have an ampacity that is not less than the value of the primary to secondary voltage ratio. So the primary is 480. The secondary is what? 208. Okay, so it has to have, and so in order to get that ratio, we're going to go 480. Okay, and it says 480 to 8 is 2.307. So we'll just say 2.30. We'll just say 2.31. We'll round it up to get it to the smallest value. Okay, so 2.31 is our ratio. So it says the conductor supplying the secondary of the transformer shall have an ampacity. Okay, so that is dictating the minimum size for these conductors here, which may be larger depending on our transformer and loads, but that's a minimum factor. So can't be less. Okay, so we're sizing these. And as you can see in your call out, it says the conductor supplying the transformer secondary shall have an ampacity of not less than, could be more, not less than the primary to secondary voltage ratio, which we did, multiplied by 1/3 of the feeder conductor's overcurrent device rating. Okay, so that's what we have in 240.21b32. So let's go back to the code. And again, the conductors supplied by the secondary of the transformer shall have an ampacity of not less than the value of the primary to secondary voltage ratio, which is 2.31, multiplied by 1/3 of the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the feeder conductor. Okay, and that was 300 amps, right? So 1/3 of that is 100 amps. So we have, in this case, we go 2.31 times 100. So that was going to be what? We have to have secondary conductors that are no less than 231 amps, okay? Because that would be the primary ratio multiplied by 1/3 the rating of the overcurrent, okay? So again, we didn't really have to do a lot of math there because it was 300 amps. So 1/3 of that is 100, so easy math. But so that conductor, so in this scenario, this secondary conductor has to have an ampacity of at least 231 in order to use this rule. Okay, let's get us back to here. Now, third one is we've already covered. This one is the length. The total length of one primary plus the secondary exceeding any portion of the primary conductor that is protected at its ampacity is not over 25. So that's how we got the combination. So whatever from the primary side tap down to the transformer, including the secondary conductors, that maximum distance cannot exceed 25 feet. And this is probably a good example of where you really are not going to exceed that on the secondary. You're probably going to use all of that distance you can on the primary side because you're probably tapping in the trough somewhere and you need to move it down and have a location where you can put that transformer, and then you'll change over and have the transformer, and then you'll have the panel after it for the secondary. Okay, so usually that distance is all going to be within 25 feet. Or not usually, in this case, it has to be if you want to use this rule, if you want to tap a feeder for your transformers. If not, just take your own separate line, to your transformer, and you don't have to worry about this. But this is if you're tapping a conductor, tapping a feeder. All right, next it says, the primary and secondary conductors are protected from physical damage by being enclosed in an approved raceway. Okay, so now approved raceway is whatever your AHJ is happy with, okay? It's any of the raceways approved, it's probably easier to say listed raceways, but some wireways are not listed, but they still would be considered something that would be okay to some AHJs, that type of thing. But approved raceway, and then it says, or by other approved means. Now, other approved means basically is whatever your AHJ is happy with. And notice it says or, so it can be an approved raceway that they're happy with. Typically, if it's listed and it's going to protect physical damage, that would be like EMT, rigid, things like that, that do protect against physical damage, that using this rule, they're saying, okay, we approve that raceway. Okay? And then, of course, it could be or by other approved means. So an AHJ could look at the situation and say, you know what? I don't care about you needing an approved raceway to do this. We'll let you use something else, okay? That's up to the AHJ's discretion. All right, last caveat. Okay, we're almost there, folks. We're a little over the hour, but we're almost there. Hang with me. Last caveat is the secondary conductors terminate in a single circuit breaker or set of fuses that limit, you hear me? That limit the load current to not more than the conductor's ampacity that is permitted in 310.14, okay? So those conductors, again, when you size them, you have to make sure that that circuit breaker is going to be equal to or less than whatever the conductor rating is, because we have to make sure that those conductors are protected, okay? Now, there is an enhanced here, and this is a pretty drawing that's easy for you to, and again, this makes the reference to 408.36, which is this panel board protection, okay? All right, that you have to be aware of, and there are some allowances in there. But here it's all broken out, so it's easy for you to see instead of putting this breaker here in this panel, because you could have a separate application where you hit a breaker, separate individual enclosure with a breaker, and then you hit a panel board that's in an enclosure, or they could be all incorporated in one. It's up to your design professional. But this just shows you an example here, whereas let's do theirs real quick. So here is their total 25 feet. So it's not more than 25 feet, okay? All right, and that's the total maximum length. And there's our primary to secondary voltage ratio math we did a minute ago, 2.31. And this happens to be a 408 volt three-phase system, okay? And here's 110 amps on the primary side, and this transformer is tapping a feeder, okay? In this scenario right here. All right, so this happens to be 37.5 kVA transformer. It looks like it's going to be 104 amps on this scenario. So let me do that math real quick. Let's do 37.5. And this is, let's work this out. So this is for 480. So we'll go 37,500 divided by 831.36. Okay. And let's see here. Oops. Okay. Oops. Hold on. I got my math backwards on that one. So, all right. So, and then of course, that's what we got. And then of course, we're dealing with the secondary, and let's see what the secondary would be. Primary protection here, you see it says 45 amps. And how do we get that? Well, what we did was we took this 37,500, right? And we divide that by 480 divided, multiplied by the square root of 3. That gave us the 831.36, right? So let's do that. So let's 37.5. And we're going to divide that by 831.36. And that gives us 45.10. Okay. All right. So here the amps are 45.10. Okay. So that's what we hear on this. So remember what we said here at this point? We've got an A gauge that's handling this connection. We're tapping. Okay. So let's see if see how this works out for us. Let's do all the math. So let's look at the secondary. So the secondary voltage amps would be 37,500, and we're going to divide that by, what did we say it was? 360.256, which is the 208 times the square root of 3. Remember that? So that would be that. Divide that. So 37,500 divided by 360.256. And that is 104. So that's where they get right here. And I don't know if you can see this. I might blow it up a little bit. Now it won't let me blow it up. So this is where I'm just showing you where they're getting their numbers. So that's where this 104 comes from, right here. And that IS, that tells you the current on the secondary. So that's what that is. So they size this conductor, and they need it to be what? So this right here, maximum output is 104. They're doing a 100 amp panel. Perfectly fine. That's what they've calculated their load to be. And this conductor right here has to be equal to or greater than the device it connects into. Right? That's under the normal rules, right? But now we're doing this 25-foot tap rule. So let's see if everything works out based on our rules. So let's see here. Let's do the math. So a normal transformer, we'd be okay. Feeding it, everything good. But let's see if we're good in this scenario. All right, primary to secondary voltage ratio. That is 2.31. We got it. It says the ampacity supplying the secondary of the transfer shall have ampacity not less than the value of the primary to secondary multiplied by 1/3 of the rating of the overcurrent protection over the feeder. Okay, so it looks like the overcurrent protection for the feeder is 110. So I'm going to do 110 divided by 3. And that gives me 36.66, okay? So that's the third. So what does the rule say? It says the conductor supplied the secondary. So the conductor supplied by the secondary transformer shall have an ampacity that does not lessen the value of the primary to secondary voltage ratio multiplied by 1/3 of the primary. So that was 36.66. So I'm going to do 2.31, multiply that by 36.66, and that is 84.68 amps. Okay, so in our example, is the secondary conductor rule met by this 25-foot tap allowance? Yes, it is, because this is good for 100 amps. So it is at least sized what? It's at least sized to 84.68 amps, so it meets that rule. Now, is this bigger than that? Yes, it is. Remember, that was a minimum. In this case, it's terminating into a 100 amp device, so those secondary conductors have to be what? They're going to have to be rated for the device they terminate into. They got to be protected. So in this case, good for 100 amps. So we're good on there. What about this primary? All right. The conductor supplying the primary of the transformer have to have an ampacity at least 1/3 of the rating of the overcurrent protecting the feeder. Okay. So let's see if this 8 is okay. All right. So 8 copper, 50 amps. Let's see if it's okay. So let's see that 110 amps was the primary, and it says that it has to be at least 1/3 of the rating. So we already did this, so 1/3 is 36 amps. So that conductor is at least 1/3 of what? The primary protection. So this 8 gauge is perfectly fine. Then we kick into the 25-foot, and we know that all this is okay, that this panel board and these loads are sized right. This transformer can handle 104 amps. It's got a 100 amp overcurrent device. It's got 100 amp rated wire, and they've done a load calculation. And this panel board is protected in 408.36, okay, at its rating. So this is 100 amp, okay. So these loads and all these calculated loads are going to be what? Not exceed the 100 amps, okay. So all of this is perfectly fine, and this scenario has been all sized out. So this is how we would size it. Again, as a synopsis, these conductors right here have minimum sizes they have to be. If you're going to use this tap rule, minimum sizes they have to be. Could be more based on the rating of the devices that you're terminating into and all that, and the transformer's outcome or output and all those type of things. But we know minimums. We know what the minimums have to be. Could be greater, all right? Now, one of the quick things I want to point out is this. So this is the other common application right here. This is a scenario where this is not a feeder tap. This is simply supplying a transformer, no different than it would be pulling it from a panel, from the breaker in a panel. This is no different. And so this is your overcurrent protection. This would be sized just like what we did earlier, up to 250%, because there is primary and secondary protection. And then these conductors right here, these conductors are not feeder taps. They have to follow the same rules we did earlier, and typically they're going to be sized equal to or greater than whatever the rating is of the overcurrent protection that we sized in 450.3b for the primary protection. Okay, so I just wanted a distinct difference that this is not considered a feeder tap. So you can't use those rules. This, where you're feeding a trough and you're coming out of it, you're tapping actually onto the feed. This, you can utilize feeder tap rules, okay? Make it very clear that's what you're doing, okay? Another interesting thing that I'll point out is to say all this wasn't here. Say all this wasn't here. Let's say we had to transform this disconnect right here, and it has the overcurrent protection in there, let's say 300 amps. Could I come out on dual lugs and one come out from here and hit a transform over here and things like that, and then this load come out and hit some other load? Yes. Could I apply the feeder tap rules here? Yes, because the feeder taps don't always have to be tapped physically to a conductor. They can be on the load side of the overcurrent device, and that would be still considered a feeder tap. Okay, now, if I'm sizing everything to full size, then it's not considered a feeder tap. You just follow your normal rules. But if I'm going to utilize tap rules, I have to make sure that I follow the tap rules, okay, in that scenario. Just a subtle point that I want to make out of that. That's an awful lot of information early in the morning, but hopefully you got something out of it. Good morning down in Florida, a lot of Florida. Robert, thanks for joining me, Robert, in Antonio, Texas. All right. All right, folks. That's a lot of info early in the morning. I know we still struggle with the coffee. I gave you a lot of things to think about. If any of that confused you, I get it. You can always go to paulabernathy.com. It's free. You can submit a question at any time about anything. You can say, hey, Paul, you were talking about transformers on the coffee hour, and I'm still confused, that type of thing, okay? So what I want to do is give you a verbal mental picture synopsis, okay? Primary, wrap this thing up. Ready? Transformers, primary. You can, if you're following the 450.3b and you're dealing with 1,000 volts or less and 9 amps or more transformers, which more than likely is what you're dealing with, you can go, if you have primary and secondary protection, if you have a panel that you're feeding into a breaker in the panel and the secondary, then you have primary and secondary protection. You can go up to 250% on the primary, okay? You don't have to, but you can. Most engineers will just go to 125. Now, with that said, you go up to 250%, then you have to protect those conductors on the primary at their ampacity. Okay, so typically what you're going to do is whatever you size your protection for the primary of the transformer, size your conductors to be equal to or greater as far as ampacity. There are some engineers that say no, transformers are current limiting, so you only have to size it to, let's say, 125% of the transformer's amp rating on the primary side. That's between you and your engineer. I'm going to tell you that typically 240.4 rules are going to tell you to protect the conductor at its ampacity, and there is absolutely no way you're protecting a 90 amp rated conductor when you terminate it on a 225 amp rated overcurrent protected device. Even though that's there to protect the transformer, you still got to protect those conductors. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you go and decide that you're going to run transformers and you're going to tap feeders, okay, which is very common in industrial applications, just remember you have rules you have to follow under the 25-foot combined tap rule under 240.24b3. And that is that you're from the tap at the feeder all the way to the connection to the transformer. Those conductors can't be more than 25 feet. And you have minimum sizing that you have on the primary conductors and minimum sizing for the secondary conductors, okay? All followed under that rule. Now, if you're following that tap allowance, okay? But could they be greater than that? Could they be sized larger? Yes. Remember, that's just minimum rules, okay? Minimum rules that you have to follow, okay? All right. All right, that's an awful lot of info on transformers. If any of it confuses you, again, you know what you can do. You can always reach out and ask for clarity. If you feel like I misspoke on something because I talk really quickly, let me know. I can take criticism like anybody else. If you just want to tell me you just didn't like the video, then I encourage you not to join me on the next coffee hour, okay? But if you liked it, hopefully I'll see you on the next coffee hour. Oh, and by the way, folks, reminder, go get your free mobile app. It doesn't cost anything. It's got calculators and everything on there as well. In fact, let me show you what it looks like really quick since I've got you here. Once you go to the website, you'll download it. It won't put anything but a link on your phone. That's it. It's not going to put any software. Then you click the little icon that it gives you, right? And it will take you to our mobile app. And there's our mobile app. And in our mobile app, we also have resources. Okay, and the resources are all different types of calculators. And the reason I do that is if I scroll down and I actually have quick links for protection. So let's see here. Let's talk about transformer protection, 1,000 volts or less. Check it out. We have a calculator that helps calculate it all out for you. So if you're in the field you got a calculator that you boom. So let's just do our example. I did 3-phase. Let's do a 75 kVA transformer. Let's do primary, and then let's do 208 secondary. Oops. Let's just see how the calculator works. I know it's hard for you to see it, but click to calculate. All right, it actually did it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there you go. Look at that. It did primary. It said primary is 90.2, which was what we did. And then it has a secondary, which was 208.2. That's what we did. And all the information it gives you. But here's the other beautiful thing, is that it already fills out the information for you. There, in the table up there. Tells you what the amps are. Again, if you're on an exam, you need to know how to do the basics. But if you're in the field, dude, these calculators allow you. And you remember what I said earlier? So I'm not full of crap. See where it says right here, 300 amps? That is the maximum that you could go on the secondary. Although that transformer can't put out that, nothing prohibits you from going up to 300 amps. But in the real world, you're probably on a 75 kVA, you're probably going to supply a 200 amp. At the far worst scenario, you're going to be at 225. You're still only going to be able to get 208 amps out of that transformer. But you could load it, you have no headroom on it, and it could prematurely cause it to break down over time. So you want to size your transformers accordingly based on the loads that you're going to be putting into it. That's for a whole different story. Anyway, great info. I hope you learned something today. We'll catch you in a next episode, which is tomorrow. And I won't tell you what the topic is, but let's just say it might have something to do with secondary transformer conductors to get that out of the way. I'm just saying. All right. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless.